news, you're listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast. We're bringing you insights and inspiration for growing your self-publishing business. We're your hosts. I'm Stephanie.
And Joni.
In this episode, we talked to Dana Kaye. She is a veteran publicist, social media pro, and brand manager. In 2009, she founded Kaye Publicity, a boutique PR company specializing in publishing and entertainment. Known for her innovative ideas and knowledge of current trends, she coaches her clients on how to identify and establish their unique personal brands.
Dana was an awesome interviewee. She taught us a lot about publicity. She was able to break down the difference between publicity, branding, and marketing, which Steph and I found very, very useful. And she told us a lot of tips about what an author can do to publicize their own work, as well as some of the things that you might want to outsource to a professional.
And then she also talked to us a bit about the importance of creating an author brand and some mistakes authors make when first starting out and trying to cultivate a brand or persona. And we just want to note that we recorded this at the end of March and early April. I can't remember when. So if anything COVID related seems out of date, that is why. But it was a great interview. We love talking to Dana. So without further ado, here is the interview. Thank you, Dana, for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat books.
And then just before we begin, can you tell us a bit about yourself and then how you got into publicity for publishing and entertainment?
Sure. So I went to school for creative writing. So I'm a fellow writer. And through my experience creative writing, I took a freelance applications class and we learned how to do grant writing, feature writing, reviews, all kinds of things. And I really, really loved it. And so I started my career as a freelance writer, primarily as a book critic. So I was reviewing books for the Chicago Sun-Times, for Time Out, for a number of other publications, in addition to doing grant writing, copy for insurance websites, all the exciting things. But the best thing was the book reviewing. And in early 2008, I started to see the writing on the wall. It's kind of Groundhog Day right now. The climate was very similar as to what's happening right now in 2008. And I saw that print publications were dying. They were laying off staffers, filing for bankruptcy. And I was like, okay, this isn't going to be the most secure job. And so I thought, okay, well, what do I want to do? And I realized what I loved about book reviewing was connecting readers with books that they would like, especially if these are books that they would have never picked up otherwise. And so I saw, okay, publicity or marketing would be a good next step. And so I started looking for jobs. And there's one problem, is that most of publishing is in New York. And I am a proud Chicagoan, and I did not want to move to New York. And so I decided, okay, if I'm going to do this, I probably am going to have to start my own publicity company. And at the time I was going to writers' conferences as a book critic, and I met up with a writer friend who had her debut coming out in early 2009. And she was saying that she wanted to hire an outside publicist. And she was saying, because it was the recession, it was a debut, it was coming out in hardcover, she just needed that extra support. And after thinking about all my experience with outside publicists who had been pitching me as a writer, I thought, I think I can do this. So I raised my hand. I said, I'd love to help you. And from there, we did a campaign where I was basically assisting her publisher and doing some of the things that her publisher didn't have the bandwidth to do. Jamie talked to all her author friends, said what we were doing, and a bunch of authors came to me. And within the year, I had 30 clients, 30 authors. So it grew very, very quickly. And although publishing has changed a great deal, the core of what I do is still the same. It's connecting authors and books with the people who want to read them.
So when I was looking up questions, I was saying marketing, then I'm saying PR, and then I'm saying publicity, but you're kind of like, that's basically everything you're doing is all those three things. So what would you define your job as?
Yeah, so I'm happy to kind of clarify these terms a little bit. So I view public relations as the big umbrella of how your image, your brand relates to the public. So within public relations, there's publicity and there's marketing. There's some other things too. But publicity is earned media coverage. It's other people talking about you. So whether that's the New York Times reviewing your book or a YouTuber vlogging about your book, whatever it is, it's someone else talking about your book. On the flip side, marketing is you talking about your book. So it's your social media, your email marketing, if you're doing a guest article, something like that. And so you really need a combination of both, right? So let's say you get a great review in the New York Times, which I think most authors would love to see. No one's going to necessarily know about it unless they read the New York Times, but also all of your fans who maybe don't read the New York Times won't see that review. So it's up to you to share it on social media, put it on your Kobo pages, whatever it may be. And so it's really important that you have a combination of both. And so when I was building out my company, I made a conscious decision that we were going to do everything. We weren't just going to pitch media. We weren't just going to be marketers. We were going to do everything that related to the author's public persona.
Awesome. Thank you for explaining that. That was helpful for me. In terms of publicity, what is the best thing that an author can do themselves to help publicize their work?
Pitch themselves, send their books out. I think it was Michael Jordan who said you lose 100% of the shots you don't take. So I would tell people that I didn't go to school for communications. Publicists don't have a magic Rolodex. It's not all about contacts because media is a revolving door. Those contacts change all the time. All we're doing is looking at websites, looking at magazines, listening to podcasts, listening to radio shows, figuring out how our clients would fit into that coverage and pitching them. And so authors can easily do this for themselves. There's not this stigma around, the author is pitching themselves. It really is just understand the media outlet that you're pitching, clearly explain why you would help them, because this isn't all about you, right? So the producers, the podcast hosts, the editors at the magazines, they want to know why their readers or their audience is going to care about you and what you're going to deliver for their audience. So if you position yourself in that way, you're more likely to get a yes. So if you're not sure, if you want to get your book reviewed and if you want to get that media exposure, it does require putting in some work to research some media outlets, write some pitches, send those pitches out, follow up, but it doesn't have to be an all-consuming thing. It can be a half hour a day. It could be a few hours on a Saturday. Just you can create a boundary around it to make it easy to accomplish.
So it's really important basically to make sure that you're researching whoever you're pitching to, right?
Yes, it's far more important that you write. I would much rather see someone write an amazing, well-researched pitch versus doing a template pitch that gets blasted to sir or madams all over the country, right? And so I think that if you do not have the contacts, like if you do not have HarperCollins in your email address or you're not a celebrity, it's going to take a little bit more. So it's much better to start small, maybe don't go with the Today Show if you've never been on TV before. Instead, focus on your local news outlet. Like if you've never been on a podcast before, don't pitch an NPR podcast right out of the gate. Pitch a smaller podcast to get those clips and to get some practice, frankly. And then once you have those clips, you can use those to pitch the bigger and better outlets. So that's the other reason I advocate for not just pitching a list of 50 people or 100 people, pitching in batches, because you'll see what's working and what's not. You'll see like, okay, these pitches, I sent out 10 pitches, no one responded. So I'm going to change the subject line, see if I have better results, or I'm going to change the angle and see if I have better results. So it's really important to just pitch on a rolling basis versus just saying, okay, I'm dedicating this week to getting all my media coverage done.
Do you think that applies to veteran authors as well, that you should always keep your marketing and publicity strategies kind of dynamic and respond to what's happening?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that veteran authors, next level, next devil, right? Like, so when you're a debut, you're dealing with no one knows who you are. So you do a lot of things to get your name out there. Then you start to collect readers and you have your mailing list and you have your social media followers, you have your dedicated fans. But if you're just selling to those fans, you're going to plateau and people may even drop off. So you are constantly having to put more readers in your basket. And so thinking about new and interesting ways to reach new readers. So I believe it's starting with your core audience. So let's say you write mysteries or you write romance. Start with the diehard mystery fans. Start with the diehard romance readers. Those are going to be the easiest to convert, especially in genres where they buy lots of books, right? At least for me, there's no limit. I don't have like a book limit each year of how many books I can buy. It's just if something is good, I will buy it, or seems good, I should say. So start with your diehard fans. And once you've converted them and you've built up some recognition there, then you can start expanding into, let's say, the more psychological suspense audience or the upmarket women's fiction audience and the people who will occasionally read romance or occasionally read mysteries, but it's not their go-to. And so those veteran authors who are continuing to grow their audience, those are the people who are needing to reach that quote unquote crossover market. So if you're just starting out or you have a small readership, just start saturating your genre and those diehard fans before trying to expand and try to reach everybody. Like I hear a lot of debut authors or a lot of just authors in general saying like, well, my book is for anyone who likes this. It's not. If you try to talk to anyone, if you try to talk to everyone, you'll end up talking to no one. And so it's okay to be, someone described this to me as being local famous. Like it's okay to be local famous. It's okay to be super famous in the sci-fi community or in the mystery thriller community or whatever it is. You don't have to be known by everybody.
When would you say an author should contact you and your agency for help? Like what are some specific times you think this is when they should branch out and get help from someone else?
So I love launching debuts personally. I think it's so much fun to start with a clean slate. Like there's no sales figures to overcome or terrible websites that need to be redone. Like it's great to start with a fresh slate. And we usually start 6 to 7 months in advance of pub. So that's when longer lead publications are starting their issues for the pub month, meaning like right now it's really bizarre, but most of the monthly magazines we're recording almost in April and they're starting their back to school issues like for September. And so it's weird. It's a weird industry. And so we typically start 6 to 7 months in advance so we can take advantage of getting those features during the launch month. And also depending on what type of publicity company or PR company you're hiring, they may be full. So I also think if you have your sights set on somebody, it doesn't hurt to contact really far in advance. So I just had a call yesterday with an author whose book comes out in April of 2021. So that's over a year in advance, but it's not too late to slot into that spot.
Awesome. We talk a lot about the importance of authors creating their own brand. Can you tell us a little bit about what an author brand means to you and why it's important?
Sure. To me, an author brand, its core is just who you are and what you write, right? In a very succinct equation. But obviously it goes a little bit deeper than that. But if you think about at its core of who you are and what you write, that's what you're going to be communicating to your audience. So like any brand, I pick up Diet Coke because I know exactly how it tastes. If one day I picked up a bottle of Diet Coke and it tasted like orange juice, I would never buy a bottle of Diet Coke again because I wouldn't trust it. And so you don't have to write the same thing over and over. Like it doesn't have to be a formula. You don't have to write series, but there tends to be some pattern at the core of what most authors write. There tends to be a consistent setting or themes, right? Thematic commonalities from book to book. Some authors say, well, I write YA and I write middle grade and I write adult, and this is all different brands. It's honestly not. More often than not, authors are drawn to certain types of stories, certain types of settings, certain types of characters. And if you're able to identify that common thread, especially if it's rooted in character, because I believe that most readers are really just drawn to character more than the genre, I think that that's how you get that consistent branding and that consistent name recognition. So if you think about someone like a James Patterson, who I think has a very strong brand, he writes all kinds of stuff. Like his middle grade is not separate from his adults. It's all thrillers. They're all short chapters. They're all page turners. They're all meant to be consumed like popcorn. It's consistent no matter what the age group. And so when I think about an author's brand, I think about the core of what they write. I think less about the genre or the age group. A good example is we worked with an author, Sophie Littlefield, who is a prolific writer. She writes lots and lots and lots of books, both under her name and other people's names. She co-writes. She has, I want to say 50 books at this point, but they're all over the place. So she had a small town mystery series. She had a post-apocalyptic sexy trilogy with zombies. She had women's historical fiction all over the place. But what we identified is that all of these characters, all her protagonists were women of a certain age who were seeking justice or seeking to right a wrong for their family. And so we started with the tagline of women doing the impossible to protect their children in the face of the unthinkable. We may have changed it to mothers facing the impossible to protect their children in the face of the unthinkable. And what's really powerful about that is if I had told you, oh, she also writes this sexy post-apocalyptic trilogy with zombies, you could easily dismiss that as don't do zombies, don't do sexy, don't do post-apocalyptic. Like you could easily dismiss that. But if I led with the character and what's driving the characters, it's a lot more difficult to dismiss that.
That makes a lot of sense, like finding one unifying theme, essentially.
Yeah, because how often do you hear like, oh, don't do vampires, just don't do it, right? Like that's my deal breaker. But if you kind of hide the vampires and just get people in for the characters and the setting and the concept, then they may forgive, right? We all have our exceptions to our quirky reading rules.
Do you think when it comes to branding, do you think it has to be something conscious that an author should sit down and say, okay, well, this is what I figured out my unifying theme is, or does it not really matter? Like,
I think people should do this exercise, whether they have one book or 10 books. On my website, and I'm happy to send it for your show notes, is a branding worksheet where people they list out, it's 4 steps. They list out for each of their books, the primary theme, the secondary theme, who the protagonist is, and the setting. And they do that for each of their books. And then they go through with a highlighter and highlight all the common themes. And then they take those tidbits and that's how they create their brand. Obviously, it takes some finessing and tweaking and all those things. But I would encourage authors to do that for all of their books and to kind of try to create this cohesive brand. The tricky thing is when you're writing to a brand, like if you're trying to establish a brand before you even start, it may feel a little forced. Like the muse is a tricky minx. And if you're being pulled to something, you just have to trust your subconscious that you are attracted to certain themes. So I always tell authors, write what's pulling you, and we'll deal with the branding and messaging later.
When I think of brands, I kind of think of the look of a book. And I'm wondering where that fits into an author brand, because I see a lot of, we'll just like use romance, for example, that their covers kind of look the same as someone else that writing in the same genre. Like, what is your stance on that? Do you think it's a good idea, or should you kind of branch out to make sure you have your own look?
So your look should be indicative of what's inside. So what I get really frustrated with is, when people try to, like there was, we used to work with a couple cozy mystery authors and for Berkeley Prime Crime. And I laughed because we got a book cover and I was like, oh, this is a great cover. And there was like this like kind of like haunted looking house with a cat on it. And the author's like, yeah, but there's no cats in my book. There's not a single cat. And the people at Berkeley were like, well, cats sell books. It's true, right? Like in this genre, having a cat on the cover is beneficial. There's been some studies in romance where if there's a man and a woman on the cover, it sells better than just the woman, which is interesting. But like, if it's not indicative, then I'm going to be reading and be like, where's the cat? I signed up for a cat. I signed up for, a cis, whatever, hetero romance. And now it's like not that because you decided to do this for marketing reasons. So I think ultimately, it has to be descriptive of what your book is about. It should be indicative and generate the description, the feeling of the book itself. That's the most important. In terms of doing things differently, it should be similar yet different, which is not helpful at all. It needs to be a little bit unique to your characters, your stories. And I think it's more important that they're branded to each other than it is the same or similar to other people's. Like there's a reason the romance covers look like they do. There's a reason that there's a period where every book had girl in the cover. Right now we had a book come out today that has an Adirondack. It's a romance / women's fiction novel that has an Adirondack chair on a beach.
Like Judy Blume, Summer Sisters.
Yes. There's lots of, if you go look, like Adirondack chair book covers, there's so many right now, like in this specific, like past 2 months. So because someone in marketing was like, Adirondack chairs sell, and it's fine. It works with her book. But so I think it's important not to look the same as everybody, but to kind of follow the norms of your genre, if you will.
So like do it, but don't bait and switch people. Like do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I also think that if you're if you're indie pubbing, you can change your cover, right? Like if you're not with a big publisher, you have some control. So I know a lot of authors who will, it's not a true split test because you can't have the same book up for sale, but they'll do for 6 months, they'll have one cover, and then another 6 months they'll update and cover and see if it sells any better. And I know a lot of authors who have realized like, oh, I thought this was the right types of covers, only to realize like, no, I actually need something completely different.
It's so interesting.
Kind of similar to how the trad publishing industry uses comp titles, right? Like we think you liked this, so we think you'll probably like this. The cover is just another message to say, oh, you like all the other books that have this sort of aesthetic.
Well, and it's a signal too. So I know a lot of authors who struggle with, they want pen names for every single thing they write. Like, well, this is a different genre. Ideally, your cover and your back cover copy should tell people what genre it is. Like, I don't need, like, for example, I would argue like Nora Roberts and J.D. Robb shouldn't have been different. I think it should have just been Nora Roberts, but the thriller cover should be it should be a thriller cover, and the romance cover should be romance covers. I think readers are smart, but a lot of this is happening on the subconscious level. Like we all know that if you see kind of the mass market shaped book with two people almost kissing on the cover, we know that's a romance. If it's no people on the cover, but it's like a beach, a sunset, it's pastels, we know like, okay, that's more sweet women's fiction. Like we get that. If there's, menace, like big, bold primary colors and like menacing kind of imagery, like we know it's a thriller. Like the book cover and the imagery and the coloring will send a message. We don't have to spell it out for the readers.
Do you think that there's ever a situation when an author should use a pen name?
I think that if they're going to alienate their audience in any way. So if we had an author who wrote erotica as well as YA, she used pen names for each of those because you don't want to alienate your audience. But I think I would argue that if she was just writing women's fiction, adult, and she was writing contemporary YA, I would argue she shouldn't use a pen name because, first of all, the YA readers are going to grow up and hopefully read her adult books. The parents of those teens may read the adult books. Like it's much better if we're thinking about this ecosystem of gathering readers. It's much more important to have an easy place for them to find you. And also, again, with algorithms and discoverability and all those things, like having more things under one name is beneficial.
If you were to change, let's say, like you were saying, like YA to erotica, like, do you think you should be telling your readers that you also write this? Or like, can you keep it a secret? Oh, you can keep it a secret? That's it.
We kept it a secret.
Yeah.
As far as I know. No one's ever came up to me and is like, hey, is that person this person? No, we kept it a secret. I don't think, I would say there's no reason. It would only be detrimental to the brand and to her readership, because if parents of those teens found out her other stuff, the parents would probably not want the teens to read it.
That makes sense.
I'm going to ask you the common mistakes, but I'm pretty sure you covered all of that. Unless you have anything to add, but I think you got it all.
Common mistakes of authors. I think there's like two opposite ends of the spectrum. One is assuming that if you write it, they will come. Like, I think this assumption of, I'm going to write a book, I'm going to put it up on the retailer pages, and everyone's going to come. That's the wrong assumption. No one cares about your book until you give them a reason to care. And so I think it's really important that you have to take a vested interest in your own career and do the networking, do the marketing, do the media outreach, and do what you need to do to reach new readers. On the flip side, doing way too much and being so consumed by the promotion piece that you lose sight of what you're actually doing. I don't know anyone who got into writing because they love marketing. Like, they would do what I do and go be a marketer. And instead, some authors can get so consumed by social media, by sales numbers, by algorithms, by online advertising, that they get so consumed that they forget to write the next book. And frankly, one of the best ways to promote your first book is to write another one.
Agree. I'm sure Joni can say the same thing, but a lot of people are like, I wrote a book. And I'm like, okay, you should be doing more. Time to write your next one. Yeah.
I mean, if you said, like, I recorded a podcast, right? Like, that, record another one. I wrote a blog post. Great. Record another one. If you think about it, like, you would never just release one podcast episode or one blog post. So it's the same with books. If you want to build a readership, it's so much easier to give your readers another book than it is to reach a brand new reader. So I think focusing on expanding your audience each time, but just really cultivating your key audience of readers, because they're going to come back and book after book after book buy anything you write. I mean, we get some of our authors, we get their fan mail, and we have authors that get emails saying, if you wrote a grocery list, I would buy it for 99 cents. Right? Like if you wrote anything, they get so excited. They're excited to read his newsletters. They're excited when he does a short story for 99 cents. Like they just really want to read anything he writes. And that's the kind of fan base you want, but you have to keep writing things for them.
Mm-hmm. So I guess we'll move a little bit to networking, which is another side of what you do. Like myself, I find being introverted, it's like hard to meet people, talk to people, make connections. Do you have any tips for introverted authors trying to expand not only their audience, but like working connections, I guess you would say?
So the thing is that as book people, most of us are introverted, right? Like, so if you just know that we are all uncomfortable. We all want to just go home and read, right? Maybe not now. Maybe now we'd be excited to get out of the house after we're all quarantined for weeks. But I think that if you know that, and you also know that they are people. So I think people, for example, I was at Thriller Fest, must have been a year or two ago, maybe 2 years ago. And George R.R. Martin was at the cocktail party. Ooh. There was a lot of people who wanted to meet him, and very few people who actually went up and introduced themselves because they were scared. And in my mind, if George R.R. Martin did not want to talk to people, guess what? George R.R. Martin has a place to stay. He doesn't have to be in that room. And if they're in the room, they're there because they're wanting to talk to people. So I think getting over that mental hurdle is the first step. Just understanding that anyone is in this room of their free will. No one's chained to a desk. No one's chained anywhere, being forced to mingle. They're there because they want to be. If they didn't want to be there, they wouldn't be there. The other piece is that as an introvert, what I found is that the pressure to come up with things to say and say them right and get my tagline and my elevator pitch and all those things, that's what drains me. That makes me get anxious, and it's energy draining. And those were the things that I would struggle with. So what I quickly realized is that other people love to talk about themselves. And that if you just ask them questions and keep them talking, they are going to love your conversation. They're going to have a great time because no one lets them talk this much. And so whenever I want to meet somebody and I need to make a connection with somebody, I always introduce myself, sure, but I really spend time listening to them talk and then asking follow-up questions. That's really my strategy. And what that does is it makes you more memorable, and it makes them feel more favorable towards you. They'll like you for listening. A comment I get a lot, this is a bad example because I'm sitting here talking the whole time, but one of the comments I get a lot is, you're a good listener, like you listen. And that sticks with people. And so I think that if you, instead of saying, okay, I'm going to meet this agent, I'm going to meet this blogger, I have to get my name, and I have to get my pitch, and I have to get everything across, focus on them and put the energy at them. Not only is it more effective networking, it's going to come back to you easily, but it's also not going to drain your energy if you're an introvert.
I went to my first conference. I think it was like RWA last year. And like I was with my coworker, Tara. I was like, I can't talk to these authors. I was like, I can't. It's too embarrassing. She's like, I'm going to make you. So she made me go and talk to them. And I was like, I needed that. And it was scary, but like, I feel better now and I can like talk to someone if I needed to.
But they're all people, right? Like
exactly.
No one's showing up to the conference to not meet people.
It's true.
Right? Like if they are at a cocktail party, so that's what I tell people. Like if they wanted to have a private conversation with their friends or their agent or their editor, they wouldn't be at the cocktail party. They would leave. They would go and get a drink at another restaurant or wherever. The other good strategy too is if you're in those like group networking events, which I find very overwhelming, I start by aiming for someone who is on their phone, not like talking on the phone, but texting or typing on their phone. And that's along the wall, along the perimeter. So again, it's a little counterintuitive because you think, oh, they're on their phone, let's not bother them. They're busy. But same thing, if they were actually busy, they would leave. What they're doing is they have their little safety nets, their security blanket, and they're on, and they're just like, okay, I'm just gonna look at Instagram, I'm just gonna read my email, I'm gonna look busy until I get up the courage to talk to somebody or someone talks to me. And I find that I will always say like, oh, hey, I don't know if you're busy. I just want to introduce myself. They will always put their phone in their purse or their pocket or wherever, because they're just excited that someone did it for them. Someone came up to them. Because like I said, if I actually have an urgent email or I actually have an urgent text, I'll leave the room.
Very true.
Yeah, I know. I like what you said about not focusing on giving your elevator pitch to everyone, because I think that is overwhelming and it's exhausting, and nobody wants to sell themselves 24/7.
Yeah, it is. And no one wants to be sold to. How many times have you been in those situations where, let me tell you about my book, and you're just like, oh, and like moonwalking away? One of the things I try to pay attention to is their people's body language as well. If this is too much, then people can just ignore this last bit. But two things: if you find yourself leaning towards somebody, it means that you find them interesting, you have a good connection with them. If you find yourself leaning back or crossing your arms or putting up some guard, it means that you're not digging this, and it's okay to honor that. So if you find yourself talking to somebody and you find yourself kind of leaning back and pointing your feet away and trying to get out of there, just go ahead and do that. But also find that body language in other people. So if you're talking to somebody and you find them leaning away, like pay attention to them. And then you're like, oh, this is making them uncomfortable, and maybe try to pivot. Because I think a lot of people get blindsided. They start talking at people instead of to people. So again, putting that energy on someone else and just paying attention to what they're saying, how they're acting, what their body language is telling you.
It's good to remember. But like you don't even think about that sometimes because you're so overwhelmed, but yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time you're relying on instinct with body language. And some people have that automatic instinct, right? And for other people, you maybe do need to remind yourself, like, oh, this isn't quite right, or whatever.
I'm too much right now.
Especially when you're nervous, you see the glaze that goes over the veil that goes over people's eyes, and they're just like deer in headlights trying to navigate this. And so I think, yeah, it can be really challenging. This stuff is challenging. I don't know about you guys, like no one taught me how to network. You had to just, like you said, Stephanie, go to RWA and have someone push you into the deep end and figure it out. So the more we can educate and practice, honestly, the better we'll all get.
Yeah, I think the author community is pretty good at being supportive as well. I think a lot of newbie authors say that, and they're overwhelmed coming to their first conferences. And you see it a lot on Facebook groups. Like, people are so welcoming. And that's another thing. It's just reaching out and saying, I'm new here, like, hi. And a lot of them make a reaction.
Yeah, and the online communities can be a really great first step if you're nervous about networking in person, or B, are unable to network in person because we're all, quarantined to our houses. So I think that if you are looking at some Facebook groups or Twitter hashtags like tweet chats, or there's Instagram pods, so they're like little groups on Instagram, or LinkedIn groups as well. There's areas where you can just kind of lock in and do some online networking. I know that I'm in a couple of entrepreneur groups, entrepreneur communities, and we've been doing a lot more Zoom calls and a lot more face-to-face trainings, just simply because we want that human connection a lot more now. And so I think if you are nervous about leaving your house, or you are not as mobile, or you're not in an area or in a financial position to go to a conference, you can start with these online communities and kind of practice your networking chops. And it's a little bit easier sometimes to write something and you can review it and you can have like some time to let it sit versus having to think on your feet.
So you touched on the fact, so it is March 31st, I don't know when this is coming out, but everyone is confined to their houses. What does that change in terms of marketing and publicity and getting your book out there? How are you finding that?
Yeah, we've become stalkers trying to find everyone's home address. I will say I'm an eternal optimist. That's part of my brand. And so thank goodness, how grateful are we that we are in a time where we have ebooks, where we have Zoom, where we have this technology that we can connect without leaving our house or going to the post office or needing warehouses. So that's one thing. So we've definitely been relying more on ebooks. We've been trying to find people's home addresses, pitching a lot more versus just blindly mailing books. Additionally, we've had to keep our finger on the pulse of retailers a lot more closely. And so if we are looking at print books, obviously right now we're really pushing ebooks and pushing audiobooks because that's guaranteed to land in everyone, like it's guaranteed to deliver. Whereas right now in print, it's a 50-50 shot. You're going to get your book if books are available, how delayed it's going to be. But we are really working a lot more closely with retailers, because if we're going to partner for a virtual event, we need to know where people can get their books if people do want to order print books. And so that's been a little bit of a change. I don't think we've been talking to booksellers, and even like Barnes and Noble and Indigo and all these places, we've been talking to them a lot more. We used to not talk to them that much. And so now we're talking a lot more about inventory, about who's fulfilling, where it's coming from, which stores are open, et cetera. So I think that that's been the change. Is we've been moving a lot. Obviously, a lot more events have gone online. I've been amazed at our ability to adapt. Like there's people who have told me, I'd never want to do a virtual launch event ever. And now that they have no choice, they're doing it, and it's been great. And so it's been interesting to see how people can adapt. I also think people are just really starving for connection. So we've been leading a lot of online workshops. I co-chair an annual mystery conference that takes place the third week of March every year, the third Saturday in March. So it was March 21st. And obviously we couldn't have it this year, so we took it online, and we typically attract about 200 to 240 authors, readers, librarians in person in Chicago. And when we took it online, we right now have, I believe, 1,070 people registered. And people still register. I think on the day of, we had 1,000 people participate the day of. Wow. And we've had people trickling in to watch the replays. So there's a hunger for this. There's a need for this. So I think, again, depending on where we are in the future, when you're listening to this, I think that there is a hunger for connection. And so I think regardless of if you're listening to this 5 years from now or a week from now, I think looking at what's going on in the current climate, like what people are hungry for, and figure out a way that you can fulfill that need. So if you see that people are traveling more and we're going more towards digital nomadism, then focusing on ebooks is a good way to go, because you don't have to move a bunch of books. If you're seeing that people are hungry for first-person narratives or essays and op-eds, write those. So I think keeping your finger on the pulse of what's happening worldwide and what's happening with your readers and what your readers want, I think is always going to be crucial.
Something that's kind of nice about seeing this is that everyone's had to change what they're doing, and especially the traditional publishing industries may be changing, but people are reading more than ever right now. And it comes back to people still want stories. They still need that connection. That's kind of the silver lining, I guess, of this isolation thing, is that people really do still want those basic things no matter how they're delivered.
I fully agree. I think people are craving content. And what's interesting is in the scarcity mindset, right? Like if we don't have, there's people that I know who are like, I would never read an ebook, nose up. And guess what? When Amazon says we're not going to deliver your book for 3 weeks, guess what they do? They buy an ebook. I know so many people have gotten their first e-readers, or at least downloaded the apps. Mm-hmm. I know a lot of people are listening on audio right now because, again, it's instantaneous. They can do it while they're multitasking. They don't want things coming into their house, like being delivered. And so I think that it's funny how adaptable people are. Because I know with the conference, there's a lot of people who are like, the virtual conference doesn't do us any good. They said we can't network. It's just different, all these things. But when they showed up, they felt the vibe. They felt this energy. They felt connection. People were networking in the chat. They were swapping Instagram handles and mailing lists and all kinds of things. There was that ability. And so it's interesting how when faced with fewer options, we are able to quote unquote deal with. I laugh because I don't want to go to the grocery store. I think it's just personal preference. And I would rather get creative with, canned beans and frozen peas and whatever. we can really whip up a meal if we get creative, if we have those boundaries and that scarcity. So it's interesting to see how people have adapted to FaceTime, have adapted to Zoom, have adapted to webinars, have adapted to audiobooks and ebooks and podcasts, because there are fewer options.
Yeah, and ultimately how it doesn't really take away, at least in terms of reading experience, I think human connection is something that we all miss a lot. We're all going to but in terms of being able to get the kind of content that you want, it's, all those people that were afraid of the ebooks, like, it's not that bad. Like, you're still reading your stories and getting your...
Yeah. Or people joining Facebook. Like my mother joined a Facebook group. I'm like, you weren't on Facebook. And she's like, yes, but there was this person doing a book club and I just wanted, it's one of those things where you would never think about it. I had mentioned I'm staying with our in-laws, and her mom, who has a book club, is like, how do you do Zoom? Or how do you do Google Hangouts? Because they're all going to get on Zoom to do their book club. It's really, that connection over reading is so constant. I also think that in times of stress, we tend towards more, I think fiction mostly, but we tend to read and have that piece of escapism. So if you look at patterns in reading, like in the US, our 2016 election, there was a huge skyrocket of romance purchases and other, and fantasy fiction and all these things, because people needed a release and needed some escape. And so I think that it's a form of reading is a form of self-care. It's a form of escapism. It's something that is a connector. And so what I'm loving is that, to me, I mostly read by myself. Like, I read solitarily, is that a word? But now I'm more inclined to join book clubs or to, text a few friends saying, hey, I'm going to read this book. Anyone want to join me and talk? So now what I'm finding is not only is there an increase in reading, but an increase in connections over reading.
Yeah. And you know what else? It's only been 2 weeks, and the amount of people being creative with ways to get in touch with each other, but also creative with all the other endeavors that they do. Like, people are being creative and finding ways to do interesting things. And I think that's kind of a cool.
Yeah. I'm curious, Stephanie and Jody, if I can ask, what are some things that you've been doing that you didn't typically do before this? Like, is there a creative outlet or something you do regularly, but now you're doing differently because of the situation?
I feel like I'm talking to my friends more, which is like ridiculous to say, but I'm like, okay, we have a call every week. We're going to be talking about this. We've played a game, like someone posted a game, and then we all played on our phones because it's connected to the TV. We did that, and that was her birthday thing. What else have I done?
Idea.
Netflix party. So I watched a movie with my friends, and you type in what you're going to say. I'm like, I've never done that before, but I really enjoyed it. That's what I've been doing, talking to my friends more than I probably ever have.
Which is so funny, right? I hope we don't take each other for granted when this is all over.
Yeah.
I know.
What's the first thing? What are you guys missing right now? Like, what is the first thing you're going to do?
Go out to eat.
Mm-hmm. I just want to go to a restaurant.
Yeah. I really want to go. I really want someone to cook for me. Go to a restaurant, go to the parks. So where we're staying, there's not a shelter in place order right now, at least, but so we can go in our backyard, we can walk around our community. Yeah, I miss just going to a playground and letting my kiddo just goodbye, run.
You're free.
Yeah. It's really hard for kids right now. I think I can't imagine.
Yeah. I miss, I'm a member of Soho House. You guys have that in Toronto. And so, yes, I miss sitting at Soho House so much. I do all of my deep work there. I usually am there at least one day a week, but sometimes two, where I do all of my writing, all my newsletters, all my sales pages, all those things. And I love sitting there with other creatives, feeling inspired. I miss that. I have a book club through them too.
Oh, cool.
Which we're going to try to take online, but
I did a book club online. It was the exact same, just over Zoom.
Yeah.
And we had a house tours. That's what we did.
Oh, that's fun. Yeah, I like that idea.
I feel like I miss the gym for some reason. The most ridiculous thing. I'm like, yeah, I miss going to the gym. Jody, do you feel the same way? You teach.
So I teach class at the gym, and that has been for the first week, I was like, it's like a vacation. It's fine. And I really miss the people that I'm used to seeing in my classes. I messaged a couple of people, and I think everyone's feeling the same. You don't realize that there's a connection there.
Well, in the fitness community.
Yoga and stuff as well. I haven't stopped to just sit and breathe since this started, because I haven't been doing it in the classes.
Well, there's some great apps that are opening up for free for yoga and Pilates and meditation and stuff. That's been really, really helpful. But I think what's been interesting is how people are craving connection over that too. I've been getting tagged in push-up challenges, and someone from a CrossFit who's obsessed with CrossFit posted a workout that you can do with nothing. And so she tagged a bunch of us, and we all did the workout that day. And so I think it's interesting how we will find those connections. Like I would never do a fitness, like I never worked out on Instagram. Like that's not my brand. But when someone tags you in a push-up challenge and hey, we're all here, we're all at home. And also getting really creative about what you can do at home. It's been, people who have been like taking like sacks of potatoes and using them as kettlebells and like doing different things. It's been really, like you said, Joni, about the creativity. I think people are getting really creative. I think this is going to be really good for not just writing and publishing, but the greater artistic community as a whole.
Do you think that this will have, and it will have any kind of long-term effect on the writing and publishing industry, or where do you think that we're going to see things go in 5 or 10 years' time?
Ooh, 5 and 10 years. Let's think about 5. 10 is hard. So I do think, not to be doom and gloom, but like our economy is tanking, right? Like we are in trouble. Not sure exactly about Canada, but like at least in the US, like we're in trouble. And so what that means, what that could potentially mean is if there's less expendable income, like if there's less extra money, then there's going to be less spending and like a wave of what that means. And so I'm hoping that if we can get everything under control and get the economy back up and going, that it won't have these huge long-term effects. But if we're looking at what happened in like 2008, that took about a year and a half for when publishing started increasing again. So I think that we may see a dip in book purchasing, or at least revenue being spent. What that could mean is maybe you, rather than writing, like sharing a big fantasy ebook for $11.99, maybe you're publishing it, if you have control over this, publishing it as a trilogy in increments of $2.99 so that people can buy it over the course, so it's a little bit easier, a lower barrier to entry. So I see we may be getting a little creative on pricing. I also think that right now a lot of people are writing books. So I have a feeling that agents... I think
that's going to be interesting.
Yeah, agents or indie pub, like if you go indie, they're going to be coming out in a huge wave. We've also seen that publishing houses are delaying books. So like we work with a few publishers, and all their April and May not some of the May books, but April got delayed. Some May books got delayed. So I think this fall is going to be a very, very busy publication season because everyone is pushing their conferences, they're pushing their books. So I think we're going to have a huge onslaught of books being published. So there's going to be a lot more competition than ever before. So I think it's going to be interesting. I'm wondering if there's new talent that's going to rise out of this. If people maybe are rekindling their love of reading, if that's going to keep going, even when we get back to work, or we're working, but like get back to our office. So that's what I'm curious about. I'm curious how the current trends or the current things that are happening now are going to continue. But I do think we are getting into a point where as the economy goes downward, that we may be seeing a decrease in book sales, but maybe that's going to result in more library checkouts. Maybe it's going to result in more ebooks and other ways. And I'm hoping that people who do rekindle their love of reading now will continue that into the fall when there's going to be a huge supply of books.
Yeah. I wonder though if ebooks in particular are like the lipstick index. It's a small like low cost pleasure that doesn't necessarily go down. I'm not sure though.
Well, I think with ebooks, you're right. I think the ebook price point is lower, but I do think that I think the ebook pricing is lower. So I think who it's going to impact the most, I think, is the indie bookstores. Whether Barnes & Noble survives this or not, we're not sure. I know Indigo just announced some big layoffs today. And so I think that's where we may see a little bit of a shift. But who knows? We could also come out of this with so much screen fatigue that we're dying for a print book.
Yeah.
Like I know if I'm reading a lot of, when we came down to Florida, my wife is like, wait, how many books are you bringing? She's like, get your e-reader. Like just get your e-reader. And I was like, no, because what if whatever, things happen. And so I know I'm gravitating, if I'm not reading for work, I'm gravitating towards print because I'm on the screen way more than I am normally.
Yeah. So basically read ebooks for now and support your local bookseller if you can. Go to your local bookshop.
It's a great plan, Joni. Very simple and succinct. Ebooks now, print books later.
We were looking at ebook downloads and they've doubled in a week, which is crazy when you think about that. And that's only for free downloads. So we will see where it goes in the next weeks. But speaking of books, you have written 2 books.
I have.
Can you tell our listeners a bit about them?
Sure. So the first is Your Book, Your Brand, the step-by-step guide to launching your book and boosting your sales. It's basically everything I do for a living in book form, so you can do it yourself. That's the goal. And it's available wherever books are sold, or wherever they're currently being delivered, I should say. Get it in E maybe. And then I also have the personal brand workbook. And what was interesting was that I actually made it just for my e-course members. I have a personal brand masterclass where I teach an e-course, and people were asking me for more and more worksheets. And I was like, okay, well, why don't I just bundle this up into a book? And there was an option when I was formatting and doing everything. They're like, would you like to sell this online? I'm like, well, why not? Click. And so sure enough, I do get some print book sales. It's only available in ebook through my website, brandingoutsidethebox.com, because it's a editable full color PDF, but the print book is available everywhere.
Cool. Are you working on anything new?
I just put the finishing touches on a training called Launching a Book During Quarantine, that the replay may still be available when you guys when this airs. So that was a very quick little thing that I put together. But our main thing that we've been focusing on is called Your Breakout Book, and it's a monthly membership platform designed to help authors launch their own breakout book. This goes back to what I said in the beginning. Publicists don't have magic powers. We don't have a hidden Rolodex. All the things that I do for our clients, I learned on my own. And now I get to give everyone else the shortcuts so that they can do it themselves. And so that's been really great, because to hire us in a full service capacity is not cheap. It costs thousands of dollars. And so what's really great about Your Breakout Book is it's $49 a month. It's super affordable, and it genuinely gives authors everything they need to launch their breakout book. We've had one of our authors had a cover reveal in EW. Another one was on the front page of her hometown newspaper. One of our members just signed a new 3-book deal with a publisher. I can see these amazing things happening, and they're all doing it themselves. I'm just giving them kind of the framework and the guidelines. So that's just at kpublicity.com/yourbreakoutbook.
That's awesome.
Cool.
We will share that in the show notes.
Thanks.
And people can find you at your website, which you just said. Anywhere else can people find you online?
Yeah, so I have a podcast, Branding Outside the Box, so you can go ahead and listen to that if you need more content to consume during this time. But my company website is Kaye Publicity, Kaye, and my personal brand website, by the time this airs, it may be danakaye.com. We're in the process of moving everything over because I just got my domain name back. But right now it's brandingoutsidethebox.com.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much for joining us today.
This was so much fun. Thank you guys for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast. If you're looking for Dana's books, as she mentioned on the episode, then we will provide a link in our show notes and on our blog. If you're looking for extra tips on how to grow your sales, visit kobowritinglife.com.
And if you enjoy listening to our podcast, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe, because it helps other listeners find our podcast. This episode was produced by Stephanie McGrath and Joni DePlachto. This episode was edited by Kelly Robotham. Music was provided by Tearjerker, and special thanks to Dana for being a guest on our episode. If you're ready to start your self-publishing journey today, sign up for free at kobo.com/writinglife. Until next time, happy writing!